'Twas in the far away of long ago, when the world was rarer 1,000 times than it is today. 'Twas in Donegal, too, where lived Donald O'Donnell, a blacksmith by trade, and as kindly a creature as dog ever barked at you'd never know. But after a wrestle and a tussle with the world and his wife, both got the better of him. So finally there came a morning when he got out of bed without the making of a meal in the house, and he walked out of his cottage and stood in the door of his blacksmith forge, his eyes downcast and his heart sad, when all at once he heard the clatter of a horse, and lifting his eyes he beheld riding up the road a wee red man on a pony. Well, the wee red man drew up at the forge and said, "God save ye, Donald O'Donnell." "Save yourself," says Donald. "Is there anything I can do for you?" "And would you kindly lend me," says the wee red man, "the loan of your forge fire for a few minutes, till I shoe my horse?" "With a heart and a half," says Donald O'Donnell, who was always the heart and soul of a good fellow. "And would you lend me," says the wee red man, "the loan of a carving knife?" Well, now, Donald in all his born days had never heard of a horse being shod with a carving knife, but he was too polite to question a stranger, and he wanted to see what the stranger would do. So a carving knife he fetched, and he watched the wee red man take that carving knife and sharpen it and sharpen it and sharpen it on a big stone that stood by the forge door, till the edge was very keen. Then the wee red man proceeded over to his pony and cut the 4 legs off the pony at the knee, gathered the legs up in his arms, stuck them into the forge fire, and covered them up with coals. "Now, Donald O'Donnell," says the wee red man, "would you kindly blow the bellows for me?" Well, Donald was dumbfounded at this new, strange way of shoeing a horse, but he was too polite to question the stranger, so he took hold of the bellows and he blew them, till at length he thought those legs must be consumed to a cinder. Then the wee red man says, "Well, I think they're done now." And going over to the fire and raking the coals aside, the wee red man lifted out 4 new legs with a new set of shoes at the end of them. And then he went and stuck them right under the pony, and he jumped on the pony's back and says, "Good morning to you, thank you, and good luck to you, Donald O'Donnell." And he rode off. Well, Donald was all dumbfounded there at his forge door looking after the wee red fellow. And finally, when his speech returned to him, he said, "Well, that's the wonderfulest way and the convenientest way I ever heard tell of shoeing a horse. It's wish I do I'd known that method 30 years ago. 'Tis a rich man I'd be now." Well, the words weren't out of Donald's mouth when he heard the clatter of a horse again, and when he looked down the road, who did he see coming but the King of Ireland himself, mounted upon a beautiful, big, black, dancing, prancing steed. And when the King of Ireland came as far as the forge, he reined in his beautiful, big, black, dancing, prancing steed, and he says, "God save you, Donald O'Donnell." "God save yourself, King of Ireland," says Donald. "Is it anything I can do for you?" "You can shoe my beautiful charger for me," says the King of Ireland, jumping off, throwing the reins to Donald. "And whilst you're shoeing him," says the King of Ireland, "I'll just take a look on the hill there, look about upon my kingdom. Now take good care of my steed," he says. "It's the valuablest horse in all of Ireland, or out of it." "The best of care he'll encounter with me," says Donald, leading the steed into the forge. The king went strolling up the hill, and Donald thought then to do as the wee red man had done. It wouldn't take as long, and it would be the best shoeing that horse had ever got. So he picked up the carving knife, and upon the big stone he sharpened it and sharpened it and sharpened it, till he had a fine edge on it. Then he went over to the charger and cut the 4 legs off him at the knees, and took the legs and shoved them in the forge fire, covered them up with coals, and getting hold of the big bellows, he blew them and blew them and blew up the flames. And the flames came up, and the flames came up, and the flames came up, till finally he thought the legs must be done. He went to the fire then and raked the coals aside, and there wasn't anything there but cinders. Then from the forge door he beheld the King of Ireland coming down the hill to get his horse. And there he lay, big, black, dancing, prancing steed no more, without a leg to him, "Oh, oh," says Donald, "'tis beheading me the King of Ireland'll do for slaughtering his beautiful charger." And jumping out the back window, he ran for the woods. When the King of Ireland entered that forge and beheld the spectacle that met his eyes, he flew into a rage, and home he went and turned out all his soldiers after Donald O'Donnell, and they were to bring him back dead or alive. But 3 days and 3 nights the soldiers chased after Donald O'Donnell without finding him. On the 4th night, poor Donald returned home and slept there. Early next morning he was out of his bed, more heavy-hearted than he'd ever been in his whole life. Wandering out of his house, he stood again at the door to his forge, gazing dejectedly at the ground, when all at once he heard the clatter of a horse, and lifting his eye, what did he behold but the wee red man coming along riding on his little pony. Donald saw the wee red man wasn't alone this morning. He had 2 others, one in front of him and one behind him on that pony, 2 old women, 2 of the ugliest old hags Donald had ever seen in his life before. When that wee red man drew up at the forge door and said, "God save you, Donald O'Donnell," Donald answered rather gruffly, "Save yourself." And the wee red man said, "And would you kindly lend me the loan of your forge fire for a few minutes this morning?" Donald, who was still the heart and soul of a good fellow and couldn't deny anything to anybody, answered, "Yes." And then he stood aside to find out what that wee red fellow was up to. Well, the wee red man jumped off his pony, and lifting his arms, he picked up the 2 ugly old hags, carried them into the forge, and shoved them right into the forge fire and covered them all over with glowing coals. And Donald O'Donnell, he says, "Would you kind of blow the bellows for me?" Now, Donald O'Donnell was dumbfounded, but he was too polite to question the stranger, so he took hold of the bellows, and he blew them up, and blew them up, and blew them up. And those flames came up, and the flames came up, and the flames came up, till at length, when Donald considered those old women must be burnt to cinders, the wee red man says, "Well, I think they're done now, let's see." And going to the fire, he raked the coals aside, and what do you think? Instead of 2 ugly old hags there, out came the beautifulest young maiden that Donald had ever beheld in all his born days. And the wee red man carried her out, seated her on the pony, jumped up behind her and said, "Good morning to you, and good luck to you, and thank you, Donald O'Donnell." And he rode off. Donald stood dumbfounded at his forge door, looking at the disappearing pair. And when his speech came to him, he said right out loud, "Now that's the wonderfulest and the handiest way I ever heard tell of turning ugly old hags into a beautiful young maiden." And he thought to himself, "I have an ugly old wife and an ugly old mother-in-law in the house here, and from cock-crow to candlelight there's nothing they do but jar and jibe and squabble and scold, and when the 2 of them aren't scolding one another, they're both at me." Now, he says to himself, "Wouldn't it be a grand thing entirely if I could get a beautiful young maiden out of the pair of them?" And without any more ado, into the house he went, and there sat his ugly old wife at one side of the fire, and his ugly old mother-in-law at the other side of the fire, both jarring and squabbling and scolding and spitting at each other across the fire. "By this and by that," says Donald, stamping his foot, "I'll soon put an end to this music." And he ran in and grabbed them each under an arm, and carried them both out, screaming and yelling and howling and kicking. But they couldn't do a thing. He stuck them both into the forge fire and covered them over with the coals. And then to the big bellows he went, and he blew up the coals, and he blew them up, and the flames came up, and the flames came up, and the flames came up all around. And finally, Donald considered that, well, the 2 old women were probably done. And he went to the fire and he brushed the coals aside. But lo and behold, the old women were burnt to cinders in the fire. Now Donald cried, "Oh, my life is lost entirely. The King of Ireland will behead me for killing his horse, and after that they'll hang me for murdering my wife and my mother-in-law." And out of the forge with him he went, and away and he ran for 3 days and for 3 nights without stopping once. And on the 4th day, tired and hungry, he sat down by a stream of water, took out the last bit of bread he had in the world from his pocket and began to eat. And just then he heard a piteous voice at his elbow saying, "Oh, it's you, Donald O'Donnell, and I'm very hungry. Will you divide with me?" And looking around, whom should he see at his shoulder but the same wee red man? Well, now, little as was the love Donald owed that wee red man for getting him into such trouble, he saw the little fellow's eyes look so hungry. And he couldn't resist it, and he broke his bread in two and gave half of it to his enemy. But the wee red man just clapped his hands and said, "Why, Donald O'Donnell, you're the best-hearted man in all the world, and so I'm going to help you." "Help me," says Donald, "help me. You've helped me enough. 'Tis no more your kind of help I'm hungering after. Now you be gone." "Oh, but Donald," says the wee red man, "I'm going to help you in real earnest. Wherever you go, I'll go with you. I'll be your servant boy. I promise we'll win fame and fortune." No, Donald didn't want anything of the wee red man. No, he'd say. But finally, at length, in order just to get rid of the wee red man, he had to agree to let him come with him wherever he went. And off then they started. And at a point where the road was crossing a high hill, they came to a post, standing up with a placard nailed to it. And when they read the placard, it said that the King of France was dying, and all the greatest doctors in the world had tried to cure him, but had failed. And the Queen of France was now offering 5 bags of gold to any doctor in the world that would cure the king. And the little red man shouted for joy and said, "Now, Donald, your fortune is made here." "What do you mean?" says Donald. "It's go to France will do," says the little red fellow, "and you'll cure the king and get 5 bags of gold." "Is it me," says Donald, says he, "for to cure the King of France, well, I couldn't cure a calf, let alone a king." "But," says the wee red man, "when I'm with you, Donald, there's nothing in the world you can't do." And that little wee red man wouldn't give Donald ease or peace until he said he would go. And he pushed Donald before him till they came to France. And they came to the King of France's castle. And there the wee red man knocked on the gates bold as you please, and when a soldier came out asking who they were and what they wanted, the wee red man says, "This is my master Donald O'Donnell, the most famous doctor in all Ireland, come here to cure your king." But when the soldier looked at that famous doctor in his greasy duds and smutty face, he took the flat of his sword and began walloping them away from the castle. But that instant wasn't a window thrown up in the castle, and who but the Queen of France herself should thrust out her head and call to the soldier who was it he was driving away. Says the soldier, "2 ragged impostors come from Ireland to pretend that they're famous doctors come to cure the king." "Oh, don't drive them away, says the Queen. "When all the greatest doctors in the world have tried to cure my husband and have failed, these can't do worst. Fetch them in. Let them have a try anyhow." And the soldier had to let them into the castle and up to the king's bedchamber, where they saw the poor king lie and die in a sorry sight. All the greatest doctors in the world had tried to cure him, but he was only worse after every doctor had come and tried his hand. Now he was given up and dying entirely. The queen and all the court filled the room crying over him, striving to keep up his heart, even though he was dying. The queen, she ran toward them and says, "Do you think you can cure the king for me?" The wee red man, stepping between her and Donald, said, "Yes, madam. My master here, he thinks little about curing a dozen kings before breakfast of a morning." And she asked what necessities his master required, and the wee red man said, well, they would need a pot of boiling water that should be hung on the fire there in the bedchamber, and that was done. And then he said his master was shy about what he did, and people shouldn't be looking at him, and so they must all leave the room, and the queen and all the court trooped out. And then the little red man closed the door after them and turned the key, and when Donald found himself and the wee red man left alone with the dying king, he began to become afraid and to shake and to shiver and to ask the wee red man, "Now what are you up to?" But the wee red man just says, "Hold your tongue. Get me a carving knife." Donald threw up his hands in distraction. "Oh, no more of your carving knives. Please, I got my fill of your carving knives." But the little red man commanded Donald, who had to obey. And he searched around and found a carving knife and carried it to the wee red man. And the wee red man took the carving knife and went over to the hearthstone and sharpened it up and sharpened it up and sharpened it up till the edge was very keen. And then while Donald looked on shaking and shivering and his knees knocking together, the wee red man went right up to the bed, took hold of the king by the hair of his head, and cut the head off the king's shoulders. He carried the head over and put it in the pot of boiling water on the fire. "Now, Donald," he says, "look about you, get a stick and stir the king's head in the pot." Donald had almost fainted. "Oh, no, no, I have no hand in this murder." "Hold your tongue," said the wee red man. "Get up and do as I tell you." Donald had to get up and get hold of his stick and began stirring the king's head in the pot. And as he stirred away, the head began to melt. It melted and melted and got smaller and smaller until it had completely disappeared. Well, then Donald almost fainted again. "Now," he says, "now our lives are lost for good and all." "Hold your tongue," said the wee red man. "Get up and go on stirring the pot." Donald had to rise up and begin again stirring the pot, but it hadn't been more than another minute or so till he beheld a new tiny head coming up in the pot. And each time he stirred, the head got a little bigger and a little bigger and a little bigger, till at length it was full size again, and the wee red man looked in the pot and said, "I think he's done now." And he lifted the head out of the pot by the hair and went over and stuck the head on the king's shoulders. And at that instant the king sat up in bed, talking and chatting and laughing, completely cured, better than ever he had ever been in all his born days. Well, the wee red man opened the door and let in the king in the court, and when she beheld the king sitting up in bed talking and chatting, she just ran over to kiss Donald O'Donnell and the wee red man, and she got down on her knees with her hands clasped in front of her and said, "From the bottom of my heart, Donald O'Donnell, I am grateful to you. The most famous doctor in the world ever knew is Donald O'Donnell, and I'll give you your weight in gold every year if you remain here and be the king's doctor for the rest of your lives." Donald was trembling lest the king should take it in his head to sneeze before his head was well stuck on. All he wanted was to get out of there. "And no, ma'am," he says, "why, the people at home in Ireland will be dying, and I must hurry home to cure them. And so get up my 5 bags of gold as quickly as you can, please." The queen had the 5 bags of gold brought up from the cellar, and the wee red man got them on his back, and off for Ireland they started. Now, when they had travelled 3 days and 3 nights, the wee red man looked down at his shoes and saw they were badly worn. His toes were sticking out of them. And he says to Donald, "Donald, will you buy me a new pair of shoes?" Now, when Donald was a poor man, you know he was the best-hearted man in all the world. He even divided his last bit of bread with his enemy then. But now he was a rich man. His nature was altered, and he answered back, "Buy shoes for you? Oh, no, the times are hard and money is scarce. I can't afford any shoes for you. Just carry my gold home to Ireland. That's all you're to do." And the instant he showed himself a bad fellow, that was the instant the wee red man and the 5 bags of gold disappeared right through the sky. Up in the air they rose and away, leaving Donald on the road alone and lonely, poorer than he had ever been in his life before, and he couldn't go back to Ireland. Donald's heart sank into his shoes. He was walking with his head down, wondering what to do, when next minute his head struck against something, and behold, it was a post on the roadside, and on that post there was nailed a placard, and he began to read the placard, and it said, "The King of Spain was dying, and all the greatest doctors in the world had tried to cure him and failed, and the Queen of Spain was now offering 10 bags of gold to any doctor in the world who could cure the king." Donald clapped his hands for joy. "Now my fortune's made. I know how to cure kings," he said, and off he started running, and never stopped running till he was in Spain and at the king's castle, rattling on the gate to get in. And when he answered the soldier who came out that he was the famous Dr. Donald O'Donnell come to cure the king, the soldier cried, "Oh, yes, yes, we heard of your fame. The queen heard how you cured the king of France. Why, she's been screening the earth's corners to find you. Come in, come in." He fetched Donald up to the king's bedchamber, and there was the queen and all the court, and whilst the king, who had been given up for dying, was lying there, the soldier announced that here was the famous Irish doctor Donald O'Donnell come to cure the king, and the queen got down on her knees to him. "Oh, great Irish doctor, do you think you can cure my king for me?" "Yes, ma'am," says Donald. "I'll make short work of your man for you, never you fear." She asked him what he required, and he wanted a pot of boiling water hung on the fire in the bedchamber, and all the people to leave the room. And when these were done, he locked the door behind them. And when he was alone with the dying king, the first thing he did was get a carving knife, and stooping down to the hearthstone, of course, he sharpened up the carving knife and sharpened it till it was good and sharp, such a fine edge it had upon it. And next, taking the dying king by the hair, he did not hesitate to cut the head right off the king's shoulders and drop the head into the pot of boiling water. And he got a stick and he began stirring the king's head and stirring the king's head. And he stirred away and stirred away, and the head melted and disappeared in the pot. "Ah, it's doing fine," says Donald. "It's half done now." And he went on stirring and watching and stirring and watching. But, you know, if he had been stirring away and watching from that day to this, Donald just couldn't get that new head to come into the pot. After 2 hours of this, the queen and the court began beating on the door to get in. And there was the King of Spain lying on the bed without a head to him. Donald collapsed on the floor, crying, "Oh, now my life is lost entirely. Right well do I deserve it." And at that instant, wasn't there a tip, tap, tap on the window? And whom should he see but the wee red man perched on the windowsill wanting to get in? Well, in 3 shakes, Donald had that window thrown open, and the wee red man hopped in, snatched the stick from Donald's hand and began stirring the pot, and 2 or 3 stirs brought that head right back into the pot into full size. The wee red man said, "I think he's done now." And taking the head from the pot, he went over and stuck it on the king in the bed, and that king sat up and chatted and talked and laughed. And the wee red man said, "Donald, I'll wait for you outside," and he hopped out the window. Now Donald unlocked the door, and the queen and the court came in and saw the king completely cured, and the queen was overcome with joy. And of course she begged Donald to stay and be the king's doctor forever, with a salary of his weight in gold every year. But Donald said, "No, ma'am, the people in Ireland will be dying, and I must hurry home to cure them, and just get up my 10 bags of gold as quickly as you can," which she did. Donald carried the bags out and loaded them on the little wee red man's back. And off they started to Ireland. 3 days and 3 nights they travelled, and on the 4th day the wee red man looked down at his shoes, and now they were badly worn. The toes were out and the heels were out, and there was nothing left but the tops. "Donald," he said, "will you buy me a new pair of shoes?" And what do you think Donald said? "Go buy yourself 100,000 pairs of shoes, wee red man. The money is yours, not mine. It is you that earned it. It is you that has the right to spend it for whatsoever you please." "Why, Donald," says the wee red man, "you're back again to your good-hearted self. Now you know I want no shoes from you. I want none of your gold. I want nothing, for I am one of the gentle people, and anything in the world I want I've only to wish for, and I'll have it. I only ask for shoes to test you. Now that you're your own good-hearted self again, the gold shall be yours, and nobody's but yours, and I'll carry it home for you to Ireland." And off they started, and never stopped or paused, until they reached Ireland and reached the top of the hill above Donald's own house, where they could see the house and the forge in the valley below. There the wee red man laid down the 10 bags of gold at Donald's feet and said, "Now, Donald, you're the wealthiest man in all Ireland, and you should be the happiest. Goodbye, good luck to you, and God bless you." And then the wee red man just disappeared up into the air. Donald looked down at his 10 bags of gold, and he said, "Now I'm the wealthiest man in all Ireland, and I should be the happy. No, how can I be happy? Sure, the King of Ireland will behead me for killing his horse, and after that they'll hang me for murdering my wife and mother-in-law. Sure," says he, "instead of being the happiest, it's the miserablest devil I am in all Ireland." And then he cast a doleful eye down into the valley below. But there, behold you, first thing he saw was the King of Ireland's beautiful big black dancing, prancing steed standing up outside his forge with 4 new legs under him. The next thing he saw was his wife and his mother-in-law coming running out of the house to greet him. And with a joyful cry he hoisted the 10 bags of gold on his back and went galloping on down the hillside. Behold you, when he met his wife and his mother-in-law, he found they were not only alive and well, But both of them had grown young, and both had grown beautiful, and what was better than all that, both of them had grown good-tempered once again. Donald rejoiced and went home with his arms around them, and in his joy he married his wife again, and he bade all the world to the wedding. And that was the greatest wedding ever known before or since. It lasted 9 days and 9 nights, and the last day and night were better than the first. And Donald built a castle with a window for every day in the year, where he and his wife and his mother-in-law lived happy and well ever after. But what became of the wee red man? I never heard tell. Did you?